Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending our candidate forum for the riding of Waterloo. My name is James Sebastian Scott from City News 570, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. The Chamber takes its political process very seriously as they are nonpartisan and work with all elected officials municipally, provincially, and federally. These candidates forums are an important opportunity for our members in the community to hear about issues of concern and importance to the business community. This is the first of 4 events organized by the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce in advance of the June 2nd vote. The forum for the the Waterloo riding will be held today, followed by Kitchener South Hespeler and Kitchener-Conestoga. I want to thank our title sponsor, Kitchener-Waterloo Association of Realtors, and our media sponsors, City News 570 and Rogers TV. The format for this event will be 90-second introductory remarks from each candidate, followed by questions in priority areas identified by the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce through their advisory committees and responses from the membership at large. The questions will be asked in rotation. The moderator reserves the right to terminate answers where appropriate or to grant additional chances for candidates to speak to ensure fairness in speaking times. At the conclusion of the forum, each candidate will be allowed 1 minute for closing remarks, which will proceed in reverse order from opening remarks. We'll now commence with 90-second opening remarks. Candidate order for today is Catherine Fife from the Ontario New Democratic Party. We'll start with you with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Ontario families have been through a lot. The cost of living is skyrocketing and people need to see their priorities reflected in the government. For me and the way that I feel about this election, it is truly a test as to how we respond to a health and economic crisis in Ontario. We can no longer deny that the connection between health and well-being of our citizens and the impact on local economies and on jobs and lives, that impact was very real. The Ford government have publicly declared that a separate privatized system of healthcare is in the offing. They propose it as a solution despite the research and the evidence that challenges this theory and proves that this direction will further undermine what is left of our universal healthcare system. What we propose instead is a stronger publicly funded health system that supports workers in that system, in addition to the patients and residents in home care and long-term care, and upstream investment to ensure that people age with dignity and can stay healthy. Supporting a strong healthcare system is a priority for us, and it's actually a priority for the business community. COVID taught us some very important lessons about the economy, about education, about how fragile our healthcare system is and had been for quite some time. So there are solutions before us. There are choices before us. And that is why I welcome this debate today. We have a plan that will make life better for Ontarians. And I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues actually this morning on how they propose to do this. Because we do now have a great deal of research as to what not to do. There are also very good jobs to be created by addressing the climate crisis through our Green New Democratic deal, investing in people and services that will alleviate those healthcare costs downstream, and also, and very importantly, prevent us from closing down and going into a lockdown again. I look forward to the debate today, and I want to thank the Chamber and Rogers and City News for hosting. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Catherine. We will get going with the questions that we have that we put together here. So emerging from COVID, tell us your plan to keep businesses open during potential future waves or even future pandemics. So businesses have experienced numerous shutdowns and restrictions during the pandemic. How will your plan ensure that future disruptions will be minimized in the face of future waves?
Well, excellent question. And I can tell you, I mean, as I've been knocking on the doors, the emotion at the doors is very real. And it vacillates between real extreme anger and grief. And that grief didn't have a lot of place to go, especially when people lost their family members in the long-term care system. What we want to put forward around preventing further lockdowns, which is why we are so committed to keeping people healthy, and this connection cannot be denied. COVID is still impacting our healthcare system, and I think that that's a really important point to get across. And this impacts consumer confidence, which is why we have costed out the following relief measures going forward. We will bring in 2 rounds of the COVID recovery benefit, the Small Business Recovery Grant for 2022 and 2023. This really is an acknowledgement that small businesses are still hurting. However, our system will be more transparent and responsive than the grant process that the Conservatives brought in. I have to tell you that as an MPP, I am still dealing with small business owners who qualified for assistance, but never received it. They never received the money never got out the door, which may be why this government has a surplus in a contingency fund that is still unallocated. We feel very strongly that investing in workplace health and safety to reduce transmission is the goal, and there really is no excuse for this not to happen. We will also launch a COVID-19 emergency business fund for Black-owned small businesses and entrepreneurs, recognizing that there are systemic barriers to accessing capital for women and for those business owners who have disabilities. Our healthcare focus around this area is also is connected to the economy as well. Our plan supports locally procured PPE, professional protective equipment. We saw during this health and economic crisis that companies really took a stand and really said, we want to be part of the solution. And yet, once they developed the products, I'm thinking of the Canadian Shield and Eclipse, for instance, they weren't able to get their products into our own healthcare system or our schools. That's a real problem. We want to support local economies. We want to be better prepared for the next crisis whenever that does happen. And we can support local economies by doing so. So as I said, our plan supports locally procured PPE, reliable testing, and addressing infrastructure upgrades like HVAC and air filtration systems. I want to let the listeners know that the Financial Accountability Officer confirmed in his quarterly report that only 2% of the pandemic funding that went into upgrading our schools and classrooms, only 2%. So Ontario students lost the most in-class learning time than any other province. If you follow the money, you'll know why. We did not invest in keeping those workplaces, those learning places safe and healthy, and therefore our kids suffer. So we have learned from that experience, and I want listeners to know that we're willing to invest to keep people healthy and safe in their workplaces so that we never have to go through that again. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Shahbaza Ismail from the Green Party of Ontario has now joined us. So we'll ask the same question for you and your party. Businesses have experienced numerous shutdowns and restrictions during the pandemic. How will your plan ensure that future disruptions will be minimized in the face of future waves?
Thank you so much for the question. Thank you for having me here. It was really great to hear Catherine's response regarding the NDP's approach. And as it so happens, a lot of those same approaches are under the Green Party's platforms, including providing assistance to recover from COVID-related shutdowns and barriers that have happened. And I agree in the sense of the fact that there are barriers in the system with regards to funding that has been made available to businesses, small businesses. However, it hasn't actually been received by small businesses. So there are discrepancies that need to be addressed at this level. So it's important to figure out where those discrepancies are happening and figure out how we can remove those barriers. So this does mean creating a new regulatory framework for small businesses to review some of these regulations and weed out red tape and costs that disproportionately affect small businesses. It was unfortunate that many small businesses were not able to run while big box businesses were able to run, even though there was quite a lot of spread through those businesses. And I think that when it comes to rentals as well. I think a lot of small owner landlords were disadvantaged because the costs of property management did not reduce during the COVID pandemic. And it is a disservice if we do not include small business owners, small homeowners who rent in the small businesses as well. It has been really great to see some of that community revival coming from local businesses, but we definitely acknowledge that businesses are hurting. And this is why we also have a plan to create connected communities, to have within 15-minute walking, biking distance, all the amenities and services that folks would need. And this means including more businesses within walkable distance from neighborhoods, and allowing municipal zoning to give more permission for cornerstone or corner convenience stores, and allow for more transition from businesses that are currently working with high energy costs to have retrofit programs so that we can reduce those energy costs. So those are some of the key points that I wanted to point out. I know that Catherine also pointed out the healthcare concerns, and I think that it's really important that we do bolster our healthcare, which includes incorporating mental health care as part of OHIP. And the main reason here is the financial concerns are there, and people have been hurt financially, but they've also been hurt emotionally and mentally. So it's really important to provide those services as well, so that they can recuperate holistically.
Thank you. Next question, and we'll start with. We'll go into. It feels like the hard-learned lessons from SARS were forgotten by the time COVID-19 hit, and we paid that cost in deaths, delayed health procedures, and a closed economy. Put funding aside for a moment, how will your plan ensure that the lessons learned from this pandemic aren't lost as the public's mind moves on? And Shafaza, we'll start with you on that question.
I think it's really important to have a memory of these unfortunate events like SARS. And we have currently a lot of emergency protocols in place that are part of our daily lives. For example, every now and then you'll probably have a fire alarm at your building. And that's really to make sure that we're protected against any damages that could be caused by an inadvertent fire in your building. So what are those strategies when it comes to emergency planning? And that's really what we need to start putting into our provincial plan going forward, is having a document, having that memory of what were actions that made sense, that had a beneficial impact on the community and on the constituents, and what were the actions that had inadvertent negative impacts, and find ways forward that will incorporate more of the safety measures that had positive impacts rather than safety measures that ended up having negative impacts. For example, the overuse of lockdowns. Yes, initially a lockdown made sense, and it helped to level the curve of spread. However, our healthcare system was already crippled going into the COVID pandemic because of cuts to healthcare. Same thing with education. The education system was crippled going into the pandemic. And as Catherine was mentioning, a lot of students lost that school time and teachers were burnt out. We have healthcare professionals who are burnt out. So we were going into a pandemic, having already dug a grave rather than bolstering those systems. So it's really important that we think about how we're going to bolster those systems and build resilience, so that when we have our next emergency, we are ready for that. And this includes contingency planning.
Thank you, Shafaza. Catherine, same question for you when it comes to not remembering the hard learned lessons from SARS that were forgotten when the COVID-19 pandemic hit.
Yeah, really good question. I mean, it was fairly shocking though that when when the pandemic was emerging and the government was trying to evaluate what they had to do, that they hadn't taken stock of the PPE stockpile of resources and that they had all expired. And this is really a sort of a Liberal hangover, as I like to call it, because the Liberals, brought in a commission to study the SARS health crisis. They went through the motions of saying, okay, well, we made it through that, and we're gonna take these various steps. But they never really acted on infrastructure investment, on building up those systems of care to make sure that our local communities would be held safe. So I think that what we are, what we have committed to doing is an independent inquiry into the COVID-19 crisis. Some of the questions that we want answered: who was really driving the decision-making process? There was great inconsistency from the health science table to the medical officer of health to the government. And for us, having the medical officer of health, the chief medical officer of health for the province of Ontario, be an independent position, free from political interference, would be a good first step. And so we have made that commitment. We have also said that on a go-forward basis, that this independence, just like an independent officer of the legislature, like the financial accountability officer or the integrity commissioner, needs to have their own resources to guide that process. I don't know if everybody remembers, but I remember one press conference where the associate medical officer of health and the chief were caught on camera saying, we just read what they tell us to say. And that undermined confidence in the entire process. So that independence is needed. That review is needed also to determine how are contracts being determined. I mean, really, there are very legitimate questions that the CFIB has raised, that the chambers have raised around who was driving the decision-making process. And so there's the integrity of those lessons need to be held in trust. I would say also that one of the key learnings is that we have to be more self-sufficient as a province, from a healthcare perspective, from a home care perspective, and that oversight can't just happen in a crisis. It needs to happen throughout. And what I'm referring to specifically is what happened in our long-term care homes. Over 4,300 seniors died prematurely during this crisis. The long-term care system had been in crisis for a number of years. We had raised it with successive Liberal and Conservative governments, particularly responding to the Auditor General reports, which demonstrated that there was high turnover of staff in those institutions, particularly the for-profit institutions. And I say institutions because we need to move away from institutions, and that there was a lack of training. In the 2019 Auditor General report, just prior to the pandemic, she made clear that public health guidelines were not being followed in these homes. People were dying needlessly of dysentery and of bed sores and of really neglect. This was not something that any government had addressed. We were trying to push the government to do the 4 hours of care, to raise the residents to staff ratio to make sure that this didn't happen. And really, the lessons going forward need to be documented, they need to be reviewed, and they need to be acted on. So those are some of the lessons that we have taken away from COVID. But at the end of the day, this pandemic exposed a broken, underfunded healthcare system that had systemically been allowed to get to a point of crisis with hallway healthcare, with paramedics running code reds. So we can't turn away from that knowledge now. We have to act. And that is why our plan focuses on strengthening the home care and broadening out that spectrum of care to home care so seniors can stay in their homes, live with dignity, And then also that would give us 8 years to transition the profit agenda out of long-term care.
Thank you. The great majority of Ontarians are fully vaccinated. When it comes to mandatory vaccinations, however, there are concerns even among the fully vaccinated. In what settings or under what circumstances would your plan require vaccinations? Catherine, we'll start with you on this question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this is so topical, and people are so polarized on it, I will say. We've been fairly clear about this. We believe that in high-risk settings like schools where children are, I think only 65% vaccinated, then though, basic protocols need to be in place to keep those children and those staff safe. What we do know about the exposure to COVID-19 and the Omicron variant following that first initial wave is that schools can become places where the transmission of COVID-19 happens and then comes back to the home and then goes to the workplace, and then you have a crisis. So we favor when people are working with at-risk residents in long-term care, in congregate settings where where extreme needs of care have to happen, and then we've been very encouraging of folks getting vaccinated in the education system.
Thank you. Shafaza, same question for you about mandatory vaccinations and your plan, whether or not it would require it.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I really liked Catherine's response to that. And I think that vaccinations protect against a lot of different viruses. We have the flu vaccine every year, for example, especially for the vulnerable, like children who are in schools and the seniors as well. So I would agree with that. It's important to protect high density locations like schools. In terms of mandatory vaccination, I think it is still divisive on that front. As you were saying, that there are concerns not only from those who are not vaccinated, but also from those who are vaccinated regarding the long-term effects of these vaccinations. And while the mandatory vaccination reports were to make sure that we curb the spread of the pandemic or of COVID virus, to ensure the sanctity of the healthcare system going forward, it's really important to monitor the cases of COVID-19. And these might not need to come from people. It can come from wastewater testing. So we can figure out where the higher instances are of COVID, the virus itself, and then make a plan based on that as to whether or not we require mandatory vaccination for the folks who frequent that area or that particular vicinity. So I think it's important to really think about who we are asking for mandatory vaccination and why we are asking for mandatory vaccination before implementing it on an ongoing basis. So I do still agree that it was required for curbing the COVID pandemic. Going forward, I think we really need to evaluate how we're handling this situation and use a lot of the other data available to us, like wastewater testing.
Thank you. Masks can be annoying, and I think we've seen that through the pandemic, but they are one measure that we can deploy without otherwise disrupting businesses and society. Proactive use of masks will reduce the risk of reactive restrictions like shutdowns. How does your plan anticipate the use of masks going forward? Shafaza, we'll start with you on that question.
And in terms of masks, I think that protective gear is very important. And it would be beneficial to have that in those high-risk areas that Catherine was mentioning, like providing care to vulnerable folks, I think it's important to protect the vulnerable folks. So in those cases, I would think of it to be more mandatory to wear that protective gear, such as masks. So this would include long-term care homes, hospitals. In classrooms, it is harder to get kids to keep wearing their masks for a long time. But it is important to also protect the teachers and the educators. So this is where it would be advisable to continue to encourage the use of masks. For example, at the University of Waterloo, we do still have the mask mandate in place, and it does help to protect the people in indoor spaces. And that's one aspect of protecting. The other aspect is actually the building and ventilation rates. So it's important to have a combination of both. Personally, that's the best way you can help to protect the people around you.
Thank you. Catherine, same question for you about masks. What, if any, how does your plan anticipate the use of masks going forward?
Okay, well, there's two parts. I mean, one, masks are proactive. We are dealing with an airborne virus. It's, when that first year where everybody was wearing masks, the commentary from a lot of people is that they had never had such a healthy year. They didn't get sick. I mean, they weren't going to a lot of places, but when they did, they were fairly healthy. The other part, though, is that, we have to have the appropriate supply of masks, and that the cost of masking should not be prohibitive for folks to access it. So I go back to the point around ensuring that everybody who wants to wear a mask and feels the need to wear a mask has access to it. This was one of the points that we actually made to the Ford government during the height of the pandemic. I think they only provided $1,000 for PPE supplies. And that was regardless if you had, 200 employees or if you had 5 employees. And so, we made the point that if we are dedicated to keeping people safe, and and we know that masking works, then let's make sure that everyone has access to it. And that should come directly through a very open and transparent procurement process. The other day, I was challenged for wearing a mask when I was knocking on doors. I said, basically, I'm wearing a mask not only to protect myself, but also to protect you. And this is a basic common sense concept, I think. But there are definitely equity issues around accessing masks. I'm thinking specifically of when the government did send out a small portion of funding to, for instance, retirement homes, which, as you know, are very expensive. They were in lockdown for an extended period of time without visitors as well. The government had flowed a small amount of money to ensure that masks and gloves, sanitizer was available. In turn, some of those retirement homes passed on that cost to the residents in the homes. So, whenever we're talking about the effectiveness of personal protective equipment, in this case, masking, we have to make sure that there is equal access and affordable access. And in high-risk settings, I think that masking has been proven to be very, very effective, especially when you have a high-grade quality mask to wear.
Thank you. Hospitality and tourism were among the sectors hardest hit by the pandemic, and they are still hurting. How will your plan bridge the hospitality and tourism sectors through the crisis and ensure it continues to deliver to our shared prosperity? Catherine, we'll start with you on that question.
Well, this is a very topical issue, especially for this region. During the height of the pandemic, there seemed to be almost an apathy on behalf of the government to not address the value of tourism and hospitality to the Ontario economy, but also just sort of letting the cards fall where they may on this issue. We've made a commitment to extend the staycation tax credit, which was very slow to come out, I might say. And then we also have a specific grant for the tourism sector where they can apply for the money. And this is meant to, one, as I said, instill confidence in the sector, and help those tourism agencies and businesses really recover in a transparent way. It really goes back to the consumer confidence issue that I referenced. People have been slow to go out there, and we need to be a partner with the tourism sector through these grants and through the credits. And we also proposed a regional marketing, campaign that the Ontario government should be partnering with that sector. When I've talked to some northern tourism sectors as well, they really feel disenfranchised. But it took a lot of energy for the local groups here, for the local advocates, and you know who you are, to really break through, particularly with Minister MacLeod. She was slow to address that weddings were, and not just weddings and not just those venues for weddings, for instance, but all the industries that serve that wedding sector were negatively impacted. They didn't qualify for assistance at first. We went to bat for them and we fought for them. So what we intend to do, and it is costed out in our platform and in our costing that I just released on Sunday, that we have guaranteed funding for this sector, around a recovery grant and a stabilization grant, if you will, to ensure that the staycation credit for 2 years at a cost of $270 million in 2022 and $270 million in 2023 is budgeted for. And then we will provide 1 more year of the Ontario Tourism Recovery Program at a cost of $100 million, recognizing that this is a sector that was seriously impacted by the pandemic.
Thank you. Shafaza, the same question for you when it comes to supporting hospitality and tourism industries.
Thank you. I think I'll also extend this to perhaps gig economy and retail work. So in terms of the hospitality and tourism, yes, there's a lot less people going out right now, and weddings were postponed or canceled. And so this does definitely hurt the hospitality sector, and tourism, just the bans of travel have definitely hurt that sector as well. In terms of recovery, one of the important aspects is to make sure that there's health coverage and a basic income for everyone. So one of the platform items that the Green Party is putting forward is basic income for all, which provides a way for folks to be on level playing ground before then adding to it. And in terms of healthcare, the platform is going to extend portable extended healthcare for gig economy workers, retail workers, and hospitality sector workers, so that they have access to healthcare wherever they are, and so that a lot of their funding doesn't necessarily have to go towards taking care of themselves. So that's really, those are the two main aspects of that. Regarding tourism, the Green Party is working towards getting more attention towards the biodiversity of this province, and protecting the green belt and extending that protection to the blue belt will require more attention for tourism companies to perhaps highlight what is really great to discover in this green belt and blue belt, and transition towards those packages. So that's really one of the main ways that we can increase tourism, is to highlight what there is to protect and see, and in terms of heritage and biodiversity in Ontario.
James, I just had something to add, and thanks, Shafaza, for reminding me, but When I was speaking to the tourism sector, they also saw a huge increase in commercial insurance over this time frame for no good reason. Rates had not, there had been no incidents, no claims, but insurance kept going up. So we will be addressing that. We're the only party to say, we're going to sit down, we're going to negotiate this. Insurance is regulated by the province of Ontario. Also commercial tenancies. We want to reopen the Commercial Tenancies Act. It has not been reviewed since 1979. So we saw vendors and leaders in the tourism sector really see their rent increase with no rationale either as well. And then finally, just to go back to my original point around having some consistency in policy. I mean, I remember talking to one wedding vendor from St. Jacobs, I believe it was, and she said, listen, she said, big box stores have hundreds of people in their commercial space. I have one bride and one mother and both masked. And she said, and I have a trickle down economy that supports my sector. The other people who support my business are being negatively impacted because I can't safely accommodate a bride. And, you have to admit that made a lot of sense. So our commitment to the tourism sector is to be consistent and to be open and transparent and work in partnership.
Thank you. We'll move into private sector growth for the next set of questions. The Greater KW Chamber of Commerce fully supports the call from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce for a commitment from all parties to not raise taxes on businesses. Will you make that commitment? Shavaza, we'll start with you on that question.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. With regards to small businesses, yes, it's important to protect what the integrity of small businesses so far, and a lot of them are hurting. So it's really going to be hard for them to be able to recover if you're going to increase taxes on small businesses. So that's really currently the short answer that I can give.
Thank you. Catherine, same question for you about making a commitment to not raise taxes on businesses.
So we actually do have a small increase in the corporate tax rate. It was reduced several years ago by the Liberals from 13% to 11.5%, and that was maintained by the Conservatives. We over a 4-year period of time, excluding this current year, we will not be raising taxes. In the second year, we have a small increase. In the third year, no increase. And in the fourth year, we're back to 13%. But what we have said to the business community is that money is directly going into keeping people healthy and safe. And the return on the investment for that small increase will ensure that we never get to this place of an economic crisis again. It's important for us to be open and transparent in that, and to say to the community, for this small increase, this is what you are going to be receiving. In addition, our infrastructure investments and cost of living investments, I think we found the balance on this. We have other revenue streams around increasing around capital gains, for instance, and for us, when we've revealed our costed platform, we wanted to make sure that people would see directly where the revenue was coming from, where it was going, instead of, as Mr. Ford has done for the last 4 years, and especially over these last 2 years, squirrel away that funding that should have gone into the systems of safety and health and well-being, so that the economy would not be negatively impacted.
Thank you. Tens of thousands of businesses in Ontario have gone bankrupt over the past 2 years, and the average small medium enterprise has added almost $200,000 in debt. Consumer behavior has not returned to pre-pandemic patterns. What is your plan to support businesses emerging from the pandemic, and how will that support be targeted? Catherine, we'll begin with you on that question.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much, James. I mean, I saw that the CFIB was speaking about the sharp increase in bankruptcies from businesses. And I think that this speaks to really the current government, the Ford government, not responding in a timely manner. I remember going through 4 months of finance committee, listening to really the informed voices from the business community saying, this is what we need to stay viable. This is what we need to stay open, and really coming to the table in good faith. And unfortunately, those recommendations largely were not listened to, or were not acted on. We've recognized that the small businesses are still hurting, which is why we've made a commitment for 2 full years at that $270 million to see businesses through, to bridge them through these tough times. The biggest part, though, is really ensuring that people do come back, and that people come back to their local restaurant. They go back to their theater. They go back out into community. And in order for that to happen, they have to have confidence in the health and safety of the broader community. So we've done a number of things. Is that we have on the tourism, as I've mentioned. We've made a commitment around the staycation and the recovery grant. We've also said that, as a government, procurement can play a massive role in sort of mobilizing and the innovation economy. And, Waterloo region is one of those regions which good things are happening. The commercialization of research, businesses have stepped into a gap around life sciences, if you will. And so we have said that procurement will be a major component of our relationship with small business going forward. And I think that also identifying the talent from traditionally marginalized small businesses, like those Black and BIPOC and Indigenous owned businesses who face systemic barriers. We want the recovery of this province to be inclusive, and that is a major focus for us. There is one other thing that we have, in addition to the commercial insurance, and in addition to reopening the Commercial Tenancies Act, really to stabilize those sectors around having space. We are supportive of the Main Street digital strategy to help businesses adapt to changing consumer trends, which I think we can't deny because a huge shift has happened. We all know that Amazon is doing fine right now. But in addition, businesses, and I think this came out of a report from the CFIB, but we're focused on some succession planning for those businesses. So over the next decade, 7 to 10 business owners plan to sell or pass on their business to a family member, or sometimes to other employees. So we will be working with the federal government to allow small business owners to form employee ownership trusts and put in place incentives for the creation of employee-owned cooperatives. This is going to support succession planning, protect local jobs, keep those jobs in our community, and reduce income inequality by allowing employees to have a share in the success of the business. This is good for local economies, but it's overall good for the Ontario economy.
Thank you. Shafaza, the same question for you about consumer behavior not returning to pre-pandemic patterns. What is your plan to support businesses emerging from the pandemic, and how will that support be targeted?
Excellent. Thank you again for that question. I think there's a lot to discuss here. One of those is how are we transitioning, knowing that we have faced the pandemic and knowing that we also have a climate change emergency. So in terms of consumer behavior coming back, yes, we want businesses to flourish again, but this might also be the time to reevaluate how businesses function and how we move forward on the economic front. So for sure, we have developed we're going to develop a program to help COVID-affected small businesses file for bankruptcy in a fair and non-punitive way, and develop small business grant program for Black-owned businesses, which was also mentioned by Catherine, and support the increased staycation tax credit for including dining at restaurants, and work with insurance providers to develop an affordable commercial insurance program for small businesses. At the same time, it's important to consider where all the wealth is kind of going right now, and a lot of it is going towards fossil fuels. So part of recovering from pandemic and going towards a just transition that includes action against climate change, it's important that we consider stopping the fossil fuel subsidies, except perhaps for farming and fly in Indigenous communities, so that we can transition away from fossil fuels and increase our ability to consume more effectively. And this means providing green retrofit programs for owners to make sure that their building is consuming a lot less energy, and then also transition to non-fossil fuel based energy sources, such as heat pumps. And in terms of taxing in small businesses, we will not, but there is going to be a corporate tax increase of 2% over 4 years for large companies. And this is where a lot of the support will come through for supporting the small businesses. So those are generally what our plans are for supporting small businesses in recovering from the pandemic. In terms of consumer behavior, we're seeing more of a trend towards wanting more local produce. So it's really important that we support our Ontario agriculture and reduce barriers for that agricultural products to get to our constituents. And that will also help to reduce prices for food. And so it's important to encourage more businesses to use local products and kind of show them that we have choices in Ontario for that. So those are generally our thoughts regarding changing the ship's direction towards more sustainable consumption and economic recovery at the same time.
Thank you. A concern that newer small businesses continually raise is the difficulty of doing business with governments. How will your plan make it easier for companies to participate in government procurement and sell domestic products and solutions to meet domestic needs? Shafaza, we'll start with you on that question.
Thank you. So I can start off with what I was saying with regards to the Ontario agriculture. So providing more support to agriculture is going to make sure that we are able to procure a lot of more Ontario local products in stores such as restaurants and cafes. With regards to, for example, Ontario's craft spirits, brewers, and wine producers, to be able to open independent offsite stores, we're going to allow access for hospitality to purchase from these suppliers at wholesale prices of up to 20%. And that will help us with managing procurement that is within Ontario. And I don't really know if this fits into procurement, but the plan is really to reduce our fossil fuel consumption as immediately as possible. So there is plans to integrate electric vehicle manufacturing within Ontario so that we can make it accessible and then provide grants to make those electric vehicles affordable to folks. So that is a particular industry that's going to grow. And that's a chance for businesses to transition towards that, as well as more sustainable energy sources like heat pumps. So there needs to be a transition from natural gas to heat pumps, and we'll need more skilled personnel to make sure that this transition is going to happen. And same thing with green retrofits. We'll need skilled personnel to ensure this transition. So there is a plan in place to to support the training of personnel to ensure this transition.
Thank you. And Catherine, and the same question for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really important point, actually, in the history of our province, because the government has recently created a new agency called Supply Ontario. So it's supposed to be another super agency, so that one-stop shopping. I mean, this is a government that has every slogan under their copyright, if you will. But the action doesn't actually fall from those slogans. Supply Ontario, though, for us, that's why I worked with the Chamber, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, to bring forward a diversifying of the procurement chain, because I see that there's so much talent in this province, which is not actually being mobilized by the government of Ontario. And let's be honest, governments need help. They're not always good at following through on their goals. I mean, and there is a serious trust issue. I think that this government has greatly disappointed the business community by being so erratic and inconsistent in their application. And really sort of, those gas stations, they didn't want those stickers on their gas pumps. I heard from local gas stations say, do I really have to do this? And no, there is some local autonomy and some expertise in the community, in the small business community, that really should be respected. So we see the business community and really, especially in this region, I'm thinking of a variety of companies that have specifically on life sciences, and that is a passion of mine because we pay for the research at universities. The transfer of that knowledge into the field through the commercialization of research is not realized in Ontario as it should be, which is really unfortunate because we don't capitalize on the job creation piece. We don't capitalize on the health benefits of that technology. And then those jobs go to other sectors. So we're really good at having creative, innovative ideas, but we need to scale up those ideas into sustainable businesses that create good jobs that actually benefit the health and well-being of the people of Ontario. And we have a responsibility actually to follow through on that. So this is very much in keeping with our vision of healthcare in Ontario. And it is one of those cost drivers for the healthcare system that can be alleviated in a good and proactive way. So we are welcoming to continuing to build on that trust with small businesses in Ontario. And I think that given the way that this government has behaved, that there's room to reestablish those goals.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next topic, which is energy. To meet forecast demand, Ontario will need an additional 3 million EV charging stations. What's your plan to get them built? Catherine, we'll begin with you on that question.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you raised this issue because this government started off their first term by ripping out charging stations for electric vehicles at GO stations, which makes no sense. And from there, it didn't get any better. They've recently, changed their language on the EV electric vehicle sector, but our plan has an incentive on the consumer end, because we do believe that everybody should have the ability to not rely on fossil fuels, not rely on gas, and especially given the price of gas these days. So we are coming to the table in an open, transparent manner with an incentive. But also we're supporting the entire automotive industry from a collective perspective, if you will. I recently met with Toyota through a meeting that the Chamber arranged for myself and Andrea Horvath. Toyota is looking at the competitive advantage that other sectors have, namely the states, with regards to this. They've said that there are 15,000 EV chargers in Ontario. They need 70,000 to address that range anxiety that electric vehicle drivers have identified. and to really boost up that consumer confidence that this is the direction that we're going. Our Green New Democratic Deal has us getting has us getting to, I think it's by 2035, Ontario's first zero emissions vehicle strategy, 100% by 2035. This can happen if if the automotive sector sees a true partner in government and not sort of this erratic behavior. But just on the Green New Democratic Deal, this for us, we introduced our answer, our plan, our strategy to the crisis, which it is, in our first year, because we wanted to roadmap out what we would need to do in order to address aggressively greenhouse gas emissions. So we are calling we're not calling on this government because they didn't listen, but in our plan we have all newly built public, residential, and commercial buildings to be net zero by 2030. We believe strongly, and I believe the Greens also believe this, that the smart money is on conservation. So we have proposed a world-leading retrofit program that would generate $15.2 billion over 4 years to the economy and create 100,000 jobs. And just on this, I'd like to say, I've learned from organizations like REAP here locally over the years, where when you partner with largely the not-for-profit sector in this regard, and you learn from them, the benefits are profound. The REAP program makes a very good case for a targeted investment. For us, this would be support for retrofitting homes to the tune of $7,000 to $11,000 per grant to address energy conservation measures, water saving measures in homes. But in order to access some of those tax credits down the line, you actually have to use local tradeswomen to do the work. And this also is a consumer protection issue. So you're making sure that the people who are doing the work are actually trained and qualified to do so. And then there is a benefit to the economy by creating those local jobs. There's a benefit by reducing energy use and by ensuring that the work is of quality regard. So we are going to get to Ontario's first zero emissions vehicle strategy by 2035. We are going to go back to the new cap and trade system, which was canceled by Ford. Even though he went to court, he lost again and again and again. And now we have the backstop, which is the federal carbon tax. The electrification of our municipal transit system by 2040. It is downright embarrassing that Ontario is still having diesel trains run from Kitchener Waterloo to Toronto on the regular basis. So there are measures that can happen that are actionable, that create good local jobs, support local economies, and address the climate crisis.
Thank you, Catherine. Shavaza, as well, to meet forecast demand, Ontario will need an additional 3 million EV charging stations. What's your plan to get them built?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I just want to build on things that Catherine has said rather than repeat a lot of what has been said, which was really important. So the specific aspects of the plan are to require all new or resurfaced parking areas, public and private, to install EV charging and provide a tax incentive for businesses to install charging infrastructure. Also requiring existing parking lots and garages, public or private, above ground or below ground, to install access to EV charging in 25% of the spots by 2024, 50% by 2030, and 75% by 2035. And this gives us a little bit of a staggering so that it doesn't require a big capital investment right off the bat. It can be a little bit at a time, and they can budget for that and make use of the incentives as well. And it's important that we also amend building code so that we are ready for EV charging at homes. My partner and I, we have an electric vehicle, and we did a road trip last summer and from here to Thunder Bay. And we did find some EV charging spots on the way in some gas stations, but unfortunately, those are only for fully electric vehicles while we have a hybrid. And it's important to also consider the transition will require hybrid vehicles. And a lot of people might go for hybrid vehicles because of that range anxiety. And it might be important also to provide some of those charging spots for hybrid vehicles to refill their electric range rather than rely on the gas after that 100-kilometer. Well, in the summer, it was 100-kilometer. In the winter, it's a little bit less because of the heating required in the car. So it's important to consider what kind of electric vehicle charging stations are being implemented and redundancies in the companies that are being used and the adapters that are being used, so that it's more inclusive to all different kinds of electric vehicles. In addition to just passenger vehicles, we're going to require trucks in urban areas to be 50% zero emission vehicles as well by 2030 and 100% zero emission vehicles by 2040. And this kind of speaks also to the train issue of having still being used with diesel gas. So it's important that we phase out the sale of new gas and diesel vehicles as well as medium duty trucks. And increase the number of fast charging stations on every 400 series highway rest stop. So those are the main points here. But I would like to emphasize here that electric vehicles are one step towards transitioning from fossil fuel-based economy. Yes, we will still require cars, and it's important that we are transitioning towards clean energy. But it's also important to not rely only on cars. So one of the things that the Green Party stands for is making public transit more affordable and for increasing support to public transit so that more folks can use those amenities rather than having to rely on buying or using a car.
Thank you, Shafaza. Next question on energy is energy prices are already high, but we will need to make costly investments to green our energy grid. How does your plan balance the need to keep energy affordable while making the investments needed to reduce emissions? Shafaza, we'll begin with you on that question.
Thank you. Yeah, so this will also speak to the green retrofit program that Catherine was also talking about. I have also learned a lot from Reap Green regarding how they do energy audits. And it's really important that we have more of that at a provincial level available for homeowners to reduce their energy usage and to find areas of improvement for energy optimization. This is not only for homes, it should also be for businesses. There's a business called Enviro Stewards in Elmira that does look at energy audits as well as water audits for businesses to reduce their environmental footprint. So it's important that we reduce the amount of energy that we are consuming first, and at the same time, we transition towards electrifying everything that we can. And that will mean creating incentives for homes and businesses that already are using renewables to earn credits towards energy use for excess energy production, and then negotiate or to buy or exchange power with Quebec that has reliance on hydropower if both power and transmissions are available at a reasonable price. Of course, we want to keep things affordable. We are planning on adding at least 7,500 megawatts of short and medium-term storage to help our electrical grid run more smoothly and double Ontario's electricity supply by 2040. And make Ontario's electricity emission fossil fuel free as quickly as possible in order to transition to a more sustainable energy production.
Thank you. Catherine, same question for you. How does your plan balance the need to keep energy affordable while making the investments needed to reduce emissions?
Yeah, really, a really good question. I mean, I would encourage folks to have a look at our Green New Democratic Deal. It's a standalone plan that incorporates the job creation, maximizes opportunities to reduce and conserve, and to build in, progressive planning principles for our communities. I think that Waterloo Region actually has been a leader in that regard. And there are modes of transportation within Waterloo Region have greatly improved. But I do want to say, I mean, you started off, I think, in the last question saying, there are costs to transit. And the world of work is actually changing greatly because of the pandemic, with people not having to commute as much, which I think is good. And so we are very supportive of flexible work schedules where people would not have to commute to Toronto, for instance. I'm one of those people who take the GO train, but I also drive depending on meetings. And the drive is really, I think that it impacts, productivity of the people who do it. It obviously impacts the environment and really the quality of life. And so having public transit options for people that work for them, that are affordable, is a really key component of our plan. Sorry. And we are proposing to partner with municipalities. We want to upload 50% of the operating costs of transit. This is a longstanding promise that we have made to municipalities, primarily because the local tax base, taxpayers cannot foot the bill to expand and grow and make local transit options affordable. So that is one of the things that I think will, transfer down to local communities, which would make transit, which create more room in municipal budgets. One, to expand cycling infrastructure, and to also address the need for, I'm sorry, my computer's gonna close pretty soon. So those are some of the strategies that we have in plan, as well as the electrification of the GO train.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next topic of housing. The average home price in Waterloo Region is now $1 million. The average 2-bedroom apartment in our community rents for $1,356 a month. Our population is growing faster than our housing supply, and we are projected to remain one of Canada's fastest growing communities. You can see the concern. How will your plan ensure we remain a livable community? Catherine, we'll begin with you on that question.
So I'm just going to ask Shafaza to go first, so I can ironically plug in my computer and get more energy. Shafaza, do you mind?
Sure. Absolutely, I do not mind. This is why I actually turned off my camera for a while, because I also had to plug in. So the question here was about more livable communities, and I'm really glad that you asked that question, because that's one of the main components of the Green Party platform, is really to figure out how do we balance increasing housing and livable communities within the urban boundaries and not sprawl beyond the urban boundaries. So one of the things that was presented quite early on, even before the platform came out, was the housing plan. And this talks specifically about missing middle. There's a lot of areas within urban boundaries where there is space to build. And we don't have to go from just a single family home to towering condo buildings. We can find that missing middle, which would include duplexes, triplexes, walk-up apartments, make more of a community feel with those. Currently, there are some municipalities that allow tiny homes and some municipalities that don't. This particular plan encourages that we create a provincial standard that municipalities can then use for allowing those zoning for duplexes, triplexes, walk-up apartments. And then another component, and by keeping development within the urban boundaries, we're ensuring that we're not paving over farmland, which will ensure that we're not increasing the price of food, which is already increasing right now. So how can we make sure that we're supporting our Ontario agriculture and reducing that cost of food within cities? So that's housing, that's food. And then with livable communities, it's really important that we have access to amenities that are important to us, like education, healthcare, groceries, within a 15-minute walking or biking distance. And so the plan is to look at how we can integrate more 15-minute walkable communities within the province's plan for development.
Thank you. Catherine, we'll go to you now with the increase in housing and how your plan is going to ensure we remain a livable community.
Well, thanks very much. And Shifaza, thanks for going first so I can plug my computer. You know, we wouldn't have had to talk so much, Shifaza, if the other candidates had showed up. I might have had more time. But housing, it's such a key issue. You know, and I'm hearing it at the door from young people, from the missing middle folks who can't afford or are struggling also for rent. And then for, you know, more mature people in our community, they're genuinely worried about the sustainability of maintaining their home and also whether or not their children will ever be able to afford a house. So we are a spectrum of supports and proposed changes, legislative changes, to ensure that people have access to shelter and housing, and the opportunity to reach their potential comes on a variety of levels. So one of the key issues that I'm always hearing in my office here in Waterloo is that rent control needs to come back. The PCs removed rent control in 2018 on new units, and this started really a rush on rent evictions where people were, encouraged to move out so the unit could be painted, and then of course the rent really increased a lot. We see housing essentially as a human right, and the crisis of affordability and supply and need. So what we have proposed, and it is in our platform, and please have a look at it, is the homes you can't afford. And so this is proposing to build 1.5 new homes over the next decade by acting on, ironically, the Ford government's housing affordability task force, which they chose to ignore. The recommendations in there, identify reducing barriers for intensification. As Shifaza had mentioned, we are very, our plan is very ambitious around using the hard line around municipal hard lines, so that we don't, obviously create more sprawl, which creates higher taxes, which compromises infrastructure, and of course, farmland. So the smart strategy, if you want to accelerate housing starts, is not to build more housing, more highways to housing that people can't afford. It's to make use of your current footprint and to intensify the housing that you see there. So reducing barriers for intensification must happen. And I think that it's worth mentioning that, to see the Minister of Municipal Affairs at Queen's Park blame municipalities for not building this kind of these housing options when so many barriers exist was ironic. And so that tension between municipalities and the provincial government needs to be addressed. If everybody has to get on the same page. People need shelter, they need homes, and they need homes that they can afford. We also are very committed to ending exclusionary zoning and address the need for the missing middle housing, which is, as I mentioned, was duplexes and triplexes. And I've heard from Ontario realtors about this. I mean, there is land available that needs to be put into play, and for the provincial government to blame municipalities makes no sense, especially when their own task force made these recommendations. Repairing the current stock of the 260,000 social housing units must also happen. Would you ever buy a house and then just let it fall in disrepair? That's what the Liberals and the Conservatives have done for years now. Those are homes for many people, 260,000 social housing units that are falling apart. So we need to keep those housing units in our current stock. We want to provide income, a portable housing benefit, if you will, to 311,000 tenants, in addition to building 60,000 new supportive housing units. And we would partner with a cooperative housing movement to make this happen. The really good thing about the co-op movement is that it is truly a supportive community model that has proven to be successful. We have a cooperative housing organization here in Waterloo that have paid off their debts, and now they are refocusing on investing in maintaining and being self-sufficient. So this is a model that really has not been employed, and certainly not by the Conservative government. And we're making a commitment to those 60,000 new supportive housing units in partnership with co-op businesses, sector. Also, we are proposing a new home in Ontario program to actually help people purchase their first home. But at the end of the day, you have to evaluate what has actually happened in Ontario. And speculation and the commodification, the commercialization of housing has really accelerated during the pandemic. And this has driven up costs in Toronto, but certainly also here in KW. So we will introduce a vacancy tax on those who don't pay taxes in Ontario but have purchased properties. We will also propose a use it or lose it tax on developers that have permits and are ready to build, but refuse to do so because they're waiting for the cost to go up.
Thank you. A large-scale rental project takes 4 to 6 years to get units on the market. Office space can be converted to residential space in a fraction of that time and is often located near existing transit routes. How will your plan get housing stock online quickly to respond to our urgent needs? I'm just going to flip the order again. So if Shavaza can answer first, and then we'll go to Catherine after, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for maintaining the order. I think that there is a lot of potential with regards to where buildings are right now, and there are with the pandemic, a lot of office spaces are no longer being used. People are transitioning more towards virtual workspaces, and this does give us the opportunity to convert buildings to housing. And currently, I'm not aware of a plan to do this really quickly, and I think that it's important to first evaluate what these spaces are. I know that there is a vacant home tax currently going to be implemented under the Green Party platform. And this would be to make sure that houses that are currently already livable would be filled up first. If the vacant home tax is implemented, it will encourage folks who own that to either fill it up with tenants and provide that housing, or to relinquish control of that house, in which case perhaps to sell it. And because we're also going to have the speculator tax, I know that Catherine was talking about speculation being quite a high problem in Waterloo region. So we would implement a new housing multi-home speculation tax of up to 30% in addition to the vacant home tax. So before we convert any buildings that are for a particular use, like offices right now, we should look at what areas are already available as houses and make sure that they get filled first, and then look to converting other buildings within urban boundaries.
Thank you. Catherine, same question for you about ensuring that housing stock gets online quickly to respond to our urgent needs.
I mean, I think Shavaza has outlined a couple of options that we generally agree on. I do want to say, I think that this truly comes down to political will. And for too long, people have ignored the importance of having access to affordable housing. The government of the day can talk about housing starts, but if you can't afford those houses, then you're just part of the problem. And that's really how I see the Ford government in this regard. To be straight up, James, I mean, if we form government, I sincerely hope we do. We understand the urgency around the housing file and are willing to partner to bring in creative options, to work with municipalities, and to come to the table with the necessary funding to do so. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll move now to closing remarks, and we'll leave it to a minute maximum if we can. So Shavaza, because Catherine started with opening remarks, we'll start with you with your closing.
All right, sounds great. Well, thank you all for attending this meeting. I did not know what to expect. I apologize for my tardiness. Thank you for still inviting me and being open to listening to our views from the Green Party here. I think that the NDP platform and the Green Party platform are very in line with keeping people and planet first. I think in the Green Party platform, we do have more emphasis on the planet, but it's really important to understand the intersectionality of the effects of climate change, as well as the effects of pandemic that currently happened, but also the ongoing neglect that has been happening with the people of Ontario. And we both have a very solid plan for going forward and recovering and transitioning to a more sustainable, connected future. And it's really important that folks choose and get out and vote for a future that they want. So that's my thought on this. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. Catherine, with your closing remarks now.
Thank you so much, James. And Shabazz, I want to thank you for showing up. Yesterday at the CBC debate, it was just me. So it's good that I think that you're doing a great job. And I just want to say that. For me, this election really is, as I start off my comments, around learning from this pandemic and addressing what needs to be fixed. And one of the key issues that I'm really proud of is that we are going to lift people out of poverty by doubling the ODSP rates. We are going to be significantly investing in mental health care and bringing that under the fold of OHIP. I started this debate by attending my visitation for my daughter's friend who died by suicide. She had been waiting on a list for care for almost 2 years. This cannot continue to happen in the province of Ontario. We have looked at cost savings and affordability issues around dental care and ensuring that folks have access to dental care. We're one of the only provinces that doesn't recognize that your mouth is part of your body and impacts your health. And so this is a cost savings of almost $2,000 for families. And we are going to accelerate the pharmacare program because over my 10 years as the MPP, I've seen too many people go to the hospital, receive a script for medication and not be able to afford it. And this has downstream consequences for our health care. But finally, I really want to say our public home care plan will alleviate the pressure on hospitals because hallway medicine is real. Our emergency rooms are in crisis. We need to respect the people who work in the health sector by repealing Bill 124 so that nurses are not just called heroes, but they're actually respected by folks who should know better, quite honestly. And it's really unfortunate that I didn't get a chance to debate with the Liberal and the Conservative in this forum. But I want to thank the Chamber for hosting. Debates are an important part of our democratic process. It's the way people hold us to account. And I'm very proud that we have put our ideas forward and really taken on a number of questions because it was a panel of two. So congratulations to Shafaza and myself.
Thank you very much for the closing remarks. On behalf of the Chamber and Rogers, I would like to thank all the candidates for taking the time from their busy schedules to participate in this forum. Thank you to our title sponsor, Kitchener-Waterloo Association of Realtors, and our media sponsors, City News 570 and Rogers TV. And of course, I would also like to thank everyone from the community for your attendance. If you're a resident of Waterloo, the election date is rapidly approaching, so please ensure you're aware of voting location. The Chamber and Rogers hope this forum has provided some relevant perspectives on your issues of concern. Thanks, everyone.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
The Guelph and District Multicultural Festival has returned for in-person activities. Join us for the 36th Annual Festival, June 10th to 12th at Riverside Park in Guelph. Don't forget to bring your reusable water bottles. The Water Wagon will be providing free, fresh Guelph tap water all festival long. Express your culture and experience the world at this year's Guelph and District Multicultural Festival, June 10th to 12th at Riverside Park in Guelph.
Leonard Thompson, 13 years old, diabetes mellitus, 65 pounds.
Starve the child to let them live. The treatment's as cruel as the disease. It's a death sentence.
Dr. Banting,
this could be it.
He's the first to receive this trial.
But will it save him?
It's not pure enough.
So we try again. And again. And again.
Before the discovery of insulin, diabetes was a death sentence. Banting, Best, Collip, and MacLeod's breakthrough has saved millions of lives. Leonard Thompson's was the first.
My daughter is 7 years old and has a frenemy. They have play dates that always end up in a fight or tears. This friend bosses her around and treats her poorly, but she still wants to be her friend. What's a parent to do?
I would let them acquiesce to a certain amount, and then, when they're at this age, you still need to be supervising their play dates. So I might step in, not to correct the bossy child, but it's my child that I'm concerned about. I would just expose her to other people, teach her to have a voice, and let her know that she's got options.
At St. John Ambulance, we're all about community. We teach life-saving skills and provide community support through our volunteer services. All St. John Ambulance product sales and training registrations support these important services. Volunteer, donate, or enroll in a program today so we can continue to have an impact on our community. Visit sja.ca to learn more. At St. John Ambulance, we do more than save lives, we change lives.
Smudging is a very important part in our life as we're all learning to walk the good way. When we smudge, we use the sacred medicine, the white sage, the sweetgrass, the tobacco, and the cedar. It cleanses negative energy and replaces it by a positive energy. When I smudge, I cleanse my end and my eagle feather and start cleansing my breath to have better words. I will smudge my eyes so I could see the better things offered to me. I will smudge my ears to hear the good thing that people have to say. I will smudge my hair to have good thinking from my head. I will bring the smudge to my feet so I could walk in respect with our Mother, the Earth. Smudging is the way we give our prayers to connect our spirit to the Creator. We express gratitude for the gift of life, the learning, and growth.
Ontarians have concerns about the future. The economy and inflation, housing affordability, the quality of education, and our fragile healthcare system. For the upcoming provincial election, Rogers TV brings you the candidates to talk about these and other important issues facing the community. Before you head to the ballot box, hear from the candidates on the local campaign on Rogers TV.
Cystic fibrosis never takes a holiday. More than 4,000